I would like to warmly welcome you to today's seminar and conversations and their asymmetrical relations of power. Together, they will look into questions such as how can museums and source communities deal with terms such as rematriation and restitution, indigenize the process of repatriation, and decolonize museums and other institutions of cultural heritage. Dear audience, after the presentation and talk, you will be able to ask questions via the chat function. So, I hope that today's seminar will inspire you to research further, and I now leave the floor to Lisa Ravna-Finnborg, Outi Pieski, and Eeva-Kristiina Harlin.
Kiitos. Thank you, Silja. So, Bore baby ja bore spahtin. Hello and welcome to this event. It is my great privilege to welcome you into these discussions into the complexities of repatriation and indigenous heritage objects in museums and the relations between source communities and museums. For those of us interested in exploring and reflecting on this topic, my partners today, Eeva-Kristiina and Outi, really need no introduction. Both have blazed a trail for repatriation concerns. They have done immense and amazing work that stand out to us all as a guiding example of how repatriation, or more to the point, rematriation, which we will talk about later, can work. Despite that, I think it is in our best interest to have them give a short introduction. So I'll start by giving the word to Eeva-Kristiina, followed by Outi.
This starts very well. I'm very sorry. Kiihto Liisa Rauna ja puhdas pohti mukepealiskultalit. You are warmly welcome to listen to this conversation also on my behalf. And by shortly telling you who I am an educated archaeologist and an osteoarchaeologist from the universities of Helsinki and Stockholm. And I have mainly done my career in Finnish heritage agency, but also in Sami museums in Finland and in Norway. In addition, I have worked in all the 3 countries by making surveys in Nordic and European museums by looking at the Sami objects collections. And during over 10 years, maybe perhaps 15, 16 years, I have been working with issues related to repatriation. And at the moment, I am finalizing my thesis that is called From Repatriation to Rematriation, the Change of Paradigm. And in addition, I work together with Outi with the new exhibition that we are building to Sami Museum Siida, and also the repatriation exhibition between Finnish National Museum and Sami Museum Siida.
Good evening from my behalf. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me and Eeva-Kristiina. Lot of thanks to Liisa Rauna. Mun ammalle Tsiiske piiret Hansa Outi. Mun podan teenuleakis tope ohtioa kuovlus. I just pronounced my Sami name. I'm Outi Pieski, a Sami visual artist from the Tetnu River Valley, from the Ohtiohka region. And I have been working as an artist for over 2 decades, and my paintings and installations deal with the Arctic region and the interdependence of nature and culture. And mostly in my work, I combine the Sami craft tradition, tuotti, and the contemporary art practices to kind of reopen a conversation about the Sami people within the transnational discourses.
Thank you. And also, again, thank you so much for coming and sharing in this conversation. I think it's really important that when we talk about repatriation in an Indigenous context, we tackle that not from the perspective of museums, the perspective of the Western systems, but from our own perspectives, perspectives that are centered in Sami philosophies and Sami ways of knowing, being, and doing. And I remember when I got, because this project that you two have been working on for so long, and I can remember having had so many conversations with both of you about the relevance and importance of this project. And I remember very clearly reading the book and reading about your process, the way that you worked together with community rather than only for community and on behalf of community to bring back, to re-remember practices and knowledges about the Ladjukahpir, the horn hat. And I was hoping maybe we could start talking a little bit about that, and especially about these, because as Outi just talked about, the importance of Doitje in our practice, in our methodologies. And I remember reading about your workshops, the workshops that you hosted with people in Sami communities to work on making Ladjukahpir. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that. How did you come upon that idea? How did you work it out? And how did you experience working really at the most intimate level of source community to push forward your project?
Yeah, I can start by maybe at first giving a short presentation about the project that I have been working with Eeva-Kristiina, and it's called the Ladjukahpir, the Foremother's Hat of Pride. As in Sami, the Ladjukahpir Matarakuit Kaapakahpir. And it's an interdisciplinary project that we have been working since 2017. And we have been investigating like a complex history and legacy of the Ladjukahpir hat, and also its present day renaissance. And with the museum objects, we have been studying the effects of colonialism on Sami women. And while I am talking, you can see some visual materials of our journey with the Ladjukahpir. The project it's a collaboration between historical and archaeological research, social activism and craftivism, including the revitalization of Tuotji traditions and artistic practices. And as Eeva-Kristiina said, it's part of her PhD studies, and it's also part of my artistic practices, and it has been exhibited in many places, from the Sami Taittokouttas, the Sami Center for Contemporary Art in Karasjohka, to Venice Biennale 2019, and to Gwangju Biennale in Korea this year. And we have also published a book which kind of writes and visualize the dramatic events surrounding the hat's history, and including its demands and how do you could say, kind of spectacular reappearance. And we have been traveling across Europe in different museums, and the research has led us to many archives and collections and libraries. And we have find quite a remarkable inventory of the Latyokahpiris from the museums, which are 60. As in my Sami communities, we have not known almost anything about the Latyokahpir hat. So it's so amazing that there are actually so many in the European museums. And one very important part has been the workshops that we have done with Eeva-Kristiina in the Tietno River Valley, in Otsijohka, Tenusalti and Karasjohka in 2018 and 19. And those have been really like empowering, getting together workshops where we have invited the Sami women to participate and to find together kind of in a collective way, find a new way to make a Latyokahpir and also remember our foremothers. So as a result of this kind of craftivism, the Latyokahpir has been resignified and it has got a new positive symbol. It is like a new positive symbol for like an indigenous Sami feminism. So maybe this is for the start.
Do you want to comment, Eeva-Kristiina, is this?
Well, maybe only I think it was very good, but I want to add something actually, because Tronte 2017 was a kind of groundbreaking event, and it was kind of, you can see, or on my vision, it was also a kind of a groundbreaking event for repatriation, or and it was also the beginning of our project, since we went to see all kinds of exhibitions, and then we saw several Latyokahpirs, especially in the Båstede, the Norwegian repatriation exhibition, and we decided that we would research it together. But of course, this was not totally, it did not come out of the blue. But already before Tronte, I received many inquiries via Facebook from my Sami friends, from young or middle-aged Sami women who started to, it kind of happened. They started to write to me, oh, can you tell me a bit more in where do we have these hats and all that sort of questions. So kind of we could smell that there was something happening in the society. And of course, there are many people who have done the Latyokahpir before us. And for example, Gunvor Guttorm has published a really nice article about the hat in Northern Sami language. And so we were not the pioneers, so to say it. But it actually kind of, I think the hat came to us. And now looking back at my research and my study years, or my years doing work with the Sami community, it has always tempted me. Actually, I said it in I think it was in 2015 in an interview, that I would like to first and foremost return the horn hats to the strong and brave Sami women. So I was kind of, it has always been there, but then when we started to think about it together, and I remembered that, hey, we have one hat from Talvadas, which is Outi's home village. Then we decided that we would go to the National Museum and look at the hat, and I would start to kind of record everything that Outi says, to follow her emotions and her thoughts during this travel that we would make together, which we did not have an idea of how large it would become. And our philosophy has been to, from already from the beginning, you know, normally when researchers do studies, they kind of maybe sometimes sit on top of their results, at least in science world. So our idea was to simultaneously that we got something, we found out something, we immediately went and told it to the Sami society, to the women, and obviously I think sometimes we were so eager that we were telling people we are going to come and keep this presentation whether you want it or not. So we were very kind of persistent with this, and I think it was already from the beginning so wonderful to see how our study was really kind of, it was, we had a lot of support from the Sami community, but also I have to say we received, because we started to make a survey once again to several museums with Sami collections. Do you happen to have this kind of hat? You could see that world has changed in 15 years, because all the museums were really thrilled to answer. They were really kind of giving the answers to us and trying to help us. And even though I'm quite sure there is not a lot of expertise in the museums related to these collections, they are kind of the part of forgotten treasuries in the cellars and basements. So in that way, I think we also initiated something that we will see the results in the future. I think we also kind of stated to the European and Nordic museums, hey, look what we can do with these belongings, these items. Look what is the meaning. So I see that this as the most important thing, that we have been able to do something that is empowering, that has a social meaning, but it's also beautiful for the eye to look, and I think it's also comforting.
Yeah, I definitely think that the project and the work that both you, Eeva-Kristiina, and you, Outi, has done is a very good entry point when we want to talk about repatriation. What does that mean? What does it signify? And from whom's perspective? And I want to pick up on something you said, Eeva-Kristiina, about how you normally in a Western academic context, the researchers sit on top of the results, whereas you kind of went out immediately and started speaking about it. And it actually reminds me of this idea, or this way of producing and disseminating knowledge. So basically in Sápmi, you know, knowledge is collective. So there is no one person that owns the knowledge, but it belongs to the community. And I think first and foremost, your project really embodies this way of thinking, that we are doing this work, but it belongs to all of us. And that brings me to, you know, archives of knowledge, because as we know in Sápmi, we have had literature that consists of oral stories, but also of practices and also of objects and things. So stories are often inscribed into objects. Knowledge is something we find in knowledge. So in that sense, we could maybe say that, you know, if we want to talk about our libraries, our repositories of knowledge, then we need to go to objects. And that's, you know, that reminds me of something I heard you say once, Outi, when you gave a talk about repatriation and decolonizing museums. And you said something really beautiful that really struck me and resonated with me. And what you said was that objects are our living ancestors. And hearing you put it in that way really visualized for me that in a society where, you know, books and written works have not been commonplace, when we want to read our history, when we want to read about the knowledge of our ancestors, where we go is the museum. And I was wondering, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that? And, you know, when you said that, what was the thought behind it? How do you think about it today? And how has this project of yours into the Laidukahpir, how has that influenced that way of thinking?
Yes, it has. One of the most precious moment has been when I have went to the Finnish National Museum with the Eeva-Kristiina and met my foremother's kollegat Laidukahpir, and it was really like touching moment. And after that, we have been visiting many others Laidukahpirs in other European museums, and I feel I'm like extremely happy and feel really like privileged to being able to enter to this hidden and world of treasures, since I know they are not open to everybody. So, but because I was working with Eeva-Kristiina, I was also allowed to go there. So, as Eeva-Kristiina said, in every museums, they were really happy that we took contact. But at the same time, I really felt like a deep sorrow and anxiety also, since the visiting the foremothers Laidukahpirs were like a long-awaited visit to meet actually the foremothers, or it kind of felt like that. But at the same time, I felt like an although I felt the belonging connection with the belongings, I got the feeling of alienation towards my ancestors after like so many breaks between us, and because of the colonial past. And okay, of course, I was sorry for myself about the situation, but I really was also sorry for the foremothers Laidukahpirs that has been so long time away from their societies. So I have never felt that strong feelings with the belongings or with tuoti or with objects that I have felt in the museum cellars. And I really truly feel that they are really alive, at least for me, and I know for many other Samis. And there is also big reasons why they are so alive to us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and especially like Eeva-Kristiina, my academic background, I originally came into my work from an archaeological context. So I'm a trained archaeologist, and you know the relationship with objects is often that, you know, they are considered dead things, that they are the result of someone else, but they don't carry much in themselves. And of course, working with Outi, for instance, because Outi for me is very much a collaborative effort where you work with the material, where you work with the voices of everything around you, with your ancestors and with the material itself. And, you know, it's interesting how, because then when we go into this question of repatriation, so for a museum, for instance, to return objects might simply be about, you know, why is it important to return a dead object? But then if you look at it from an indigenous perspective, from a Sami perspective, from our perspective, what does it really mean to get an object back? What is it that comes with that? And I don't know, that's just a reflection. I don't know, would you want to maybe say something, Eeva-Kristiina or Outi, about that? Like, what do you think? Do you think that museums really understand the importance of what you've just shared, Outi? Do they understand what it means to have that connection to objects that today are in museums?
If I could answer this one, and Outi can then add to it, because I know this is something that is very clear inside the Sami society, at least with those who practice tuoji and are in that kind of surroundings, and having been a member of a family where tuoji is very in the center position, I think that it was it became, and of course through my friends and through my work, it became clear to me. But especially in my PhD, in order to kind of narrate this to the scientific world, whether it be the Sami scientific world or the Western scientific world, or the European museums or other museums. That was one of my aims, to study, to make a research about this. Why are these objects meaningful? Why is repatriation difficult? And I feel that if I can name one thing that I have succeeded in, that I'm happy about in my studies, is that I have been able to narrate or to tell about the emotions that go with the objects. And with this, I want to kind of tell it to the Western museum world, and tell it in all the conferences that, hey, look, these objects are not dead, they are alive. They give a connection to foremothers. They actually become your ancestors when you work with them, when you are in the same space. And you know, all of us, we have emotions. Well, of course, if you are have problems, you don't have emotions. I will not become a psychiatric in this way, but I think it's universal. We all have emotions, and when I, as a researcher, am able to tell what are the meanings through emotions, I think this is something that will help the Sami people to repatriate these objects back home, back to Sapmi.
Yeah, maybe I could add as a as an artist and a doyer, I'm really much working through the materials and through the hands and like a physical way of making and thinking. So it's something about, I think those are the, at least for me, it's totally different if you hold an object and can see how it is made, from which material, and you can kind of see also who has been wearing the hat. It's something totally different that you just look a photo from internet. It's like totally different. And that is about like what is the end, what it says that it's somehow connected to, like in the Western way, there is a philosophy of the new materialism, where the material is seen not as a passive but as an active author.
Yeah.
So it might have some kind of similarities with the Sami philosophy of tuoji making, and as what is the power and the energy in the tuoji that comes from the material itself. It starts from when you go to Aunastit, you go to the forest or to pick the materials and choose them, and it starts the collaboration from that. And while making the tuochi, you just receive the energy into the material, and it comes alive, and it's there is also always so much care and love put it into the tuochi while making. Otherwise, you cannot do it, or it won't work. And then in the end, there is the energy from the user, and also the power from the original context, why and for what for the tuochi is made for. So from those kind of aspects, I think it can be seen the idea of the museum belongings being as an alive.
No, I just love that, like sharing with you and talking about this, because there is so much that we could discuss and that we should discuss, and then when do we get the opportunities? But I just sometimes the idea of what tuochi is, for instance, because when you look at the translation of tuochi, so in Norwegian you would say håndverk or craft, and that sort of what tuochi is then sort of gets in a non-Sami context outside of our communities, it sort of gets limited to that one specific thing, whereas those of us that know tuochi, that work with tuochi, that practice tuochi, knows that it is in essence a system of knowledge. It's an epistemology. It's a way of learning about the world, and also a way of ensuring that that knowledge survives, right? And I often think that when you look at museums, and something that you were talking about, Outi, this sorrow, this sadness at seeing objects in the museum cellars. So when you remove those objects from their source communities, from their place of belonging, and take them away, that's a very brutal thing in many ways, and especially in the case of, for instance, the Lajjukahpir or other objects that have high value in their source communities, that you sort of, by removing the object, also sometimes remove the stories and meanings connected to that object. And then the question becomes, when the object has been in the museum for 100 years, for 200 years, when we have forgotten what that object meant, how do you sort of reconnect to that knowledge? And I think, Eeva-Kristiina, you said something very, very important when you talked about, in a way that working with these objects help facilitate healing, a healing after a colonial trauma. And I think when we talk about repatriation, and it's a very narrow understanding, right? Return of objects. But then you come to rematriation. And for me, rematriation is very much about healing some of the wounds afflicted by colonialism and by the brutal dispossession of heritage objects. And I was just wondering if do you want to just, I can talk forever, so just jump in and share in what I'm saying. But my experience when I've been working with people on museum objects, having these workshops where they learn to remake or re-remember objects, what a lot of the participants come back with is this sense of, as you said, empowerment. They feel a sense of pride. They feel elevated somehow, that this has value, and I know that value now because I've been working with the objects.
I think that obviously we have a lot of museum objects that don't have a lot of context information, and I see that this is something that sometimes you can gather this information from archives, and I know that not everyone considers it to be important, but I think that they are a part of the object's history, which is good to know so that it can be kind of erased. So I think that in the case of Laatjokahpir, I think it was quite important that we tried to study, because like you said, or like we all know, a lot of information related to the hat was kind of gone away from the society. There was this narrative about the priests prohibiting the use of the hat and saying that it was the devil's horn, or that the devil lives in it, and then there was the kind of co-narrative with the drums that the priests would burn them, and this has been this narrative has been used in popular culture.
Yeah.
And we made the study, and we tried to kind of figure all out that we could with our resources, and then brought it back to the society. A lot was, of course, that we said, okay, we think we have the feeling that this has to do something to do with Sarahka, with the female goddess. We thought this is perhaps a fertility symbol, but we cannot say that this is definitely true. But we can talk about it, and then we can discuss. And when people work with their bodies, like, I think that there is this kind of, we talk a lot about the intergenerational trauma, but we do not talk so much about the intergenerational good things that are in your body. And I think that when you, and actually Gunvor has talked about this also in some ways, but when you work together and you share the knowledge that has been gathered, and then kind of, the women start to make perhaps new meanings to the hat, and discuss about difficult things that are related to the hat. And I refer to Ailohas, Nilsa Sotalkeapää, who said that he does not know what are the original meanings of the symbols in the drums or the symbols in the rock paintings and rock carvings, but he can make new ones in the same environment, from the same culture. They are not the same, but they are equally important. And this is something I think that maybe not all the time we can go back and say, okay, this was definitely the meaning, but we can tell and gather all the information and put it in a way, we can Samify it. It can go through Samification, and then make new narratives, new meanings, and in that way also help to discuss these difficult things that are in all the societies. Could you, Outi, add to this?
Yeah, there were so many important topics where to add something, or you said it so well. But as Eeva-Kristiina said, talk about this narrative that Laatjokahpir being as like a devil's horn. In our project and research have thought that it can be interpreted as a metaphor for demonizing the Sami woman's power and sexuality, and as well as the Sami female guardian spirits, which are living under the earth, and which are like the foundation of the Sami cosmology or philosophy in the Sami society. So we are dealing, although it's an issue only on one hat, we are dealing like a big important and difficult questions. So one idea in our work has been to take part to these discussions about gender equality and point out a bit more about the Sami women's history. And
Yeah.
As a visual artist, I have been interested about the shape of the hat, and while you are wearing it, it like makes your posture like really different, and it has a physical affection when you wear it. And it's so interesting, like none of our like clothes or beautiful things, they are not only decorations, but they are like telling about something important of our societies. And that's why it has been so interesting to study the latjukahpir.
Yeah.
And I have seen, like after the latjukahpir, there came another hat, kind of like a bonnet kind of hat, really low, and which gave a totally different expression of woman, which was more what the Christianity and the Laestaria movement wanted to, what was the place for the woman in then, and I have said that it's kind of like a colonialist metamorphose, what has happened to the shape of the hat from the horn and to the bonnet kind of hat. So there is many kind of interesting views for the issue.
Well, that point is actually interesting, talking about roles and functions and what these different objects can tell us about, for instance, the history of women, Sami women, because referencing what I was saying earlier about how Duitji in many ways is a system of knowledge, in that sense, Duitji is in itself a language. So it's one of the ways that we write stories and history. And, even with the definition of Duitji as craft, you have another, you value Duitji differently. So what we would maybe refer to as Dipma Duitji, which is soft Duitji, like working with soft material, has been valued, has sort of been devalued as opposed to working with Gara Duitji, so hard material. And what's interesting is that when we look at who is it that works with Dipma Duitji, it's mostly women, has been for a very long time. And sometimes I can't help but reflect that, is there a reason why this particular aspects of Duitji has been devalued so much more than, for instance, objects made of bone or wood? And of course, when we think about what these objects mean, what you were talking about, how the latjukahpir could have had a very significant meaning in a ritual or a cosmological context. The Gakti, for instance, I always feel that the Gakti is a very important, almost judicial document referencing your place in society, but also the rights that you have to your ancestral sida, your community. And when we think about it, who then was it that sort of kept this knowledge, that made sure that this knowledge existed and made sure that this knowledge was disseminated? Well, it would have been females, it would have been women. So women would have been the keepers of knowledge, the keepers of ensuring that those that held specific rights in society was not, that those that did not have specific rights in society did not take something they didn't really have a right to take. And I think it's really fascinating how what you're telling now about how women in Sami communities work with you on the latjukahpir, on remaking it, and how they sort of reactivated meanings and reinserted the importance of the latjukahpir. It might not have been what it was 200 years ago, but who's to say that those new meanings and those new stories are less important? And I think it's worth reflecting on those aspects and also reflecting on how museum can take part in those processes by allowing for rematriation to happen. And that's also something that, you know, rematriation for me is a process of healing. So it's a way to facilitate a reconnect. And I, you know, working with museums, I don't know if they always understand that distinction.
You mean distinction between repatriation and rematriation, or?
Yeah. Or just you know, it's one thing to say that you know, you can come and you can look at the object because it's exhibited, so you can see it. You can see it visually. But I mean, I remember going to an exhibition some years back of Gaktis from my father's home community. So I went with my siesta, who is a doyar. And, you know, the first thing she did, we went very early in the day. And the first thing she did was say, listen, you go and keep guard at the door. And I was like, why? Why do I need to go and keep guard? And then she climbed over the rope that separated the exhibition from people. And then she started touching objects, looking at seams, at the fabric. And then, you know, she was like, is there anyone outside? And no, it's no one. Okay, come here, look at this. And, you know, we had this process of rematriation because what we were doing were actually, we were rediscovering techniques that, and talking about it and sort of talking about, this is interesting. I haven't seen this before. I think this is very particular to that specific community or to that specific community. But the museum initially hadn't facilitated for our experience. I mean, we basically broke, you know, every rule. We did what you're not supposed to do at a museum. And I sometimes just feel that, you know, there is a lot of work remaining in having dialogues with museums and get them to understand what it is we really need. And so, you know, continuing our conversation now, what do you think that a museum should, like, what is the museum's role? What is the museum's responsibility? And how should they help facilitate these very important processes in indigenous source communities?
I would cut this into two phases. I would say that for the Western museums, I would expect them to give room for the indigenous, for Sami people to come in and look at the objects and study them, and maybe like we have done with Outi. And I also kind of really hope that more repatriation should come, that we would see it more. I mean, the world has changed a lot in the past years, but honestly speaking, I have to say that I do not think that Western museums can take part in rematriation. I think rematriation is something that is done in Sápmi, in Sami area, among the Sami people, and inside Sami museums, and or inside Sami society, because I purely feel that these, like our workshops, they were full of emotions. And many of the women said to us, "Oh, I love this. It was such a gift for me that I could speak Sami for the whole course. I could be myself. No one is here asking, why do you say that or that?" And I think that this process cannot kind of be in an interaction where there are Western people, because you would have to teach so much to them before they could interact with you in a good way, because it's a very emotional and a very sensitive process. Having said that, I truly think it's very important to have cooperation. I'm not saying that it should not happen, but I think that there is a certain layer where it stops, and where the responsibility is shifted towards the Sami institutions, towards Sápmi itself. So this is my point, because, you know, do we have it takes a lot, like, to have a discussion with the Western Museum and kind of initiate them into this world. They are fantastic processes, but it takes a lot of time. So I wonder how much time do we have in Sami societies? Because I think that we are in a hurry with rematriation, with relearning, and it's something that gives empowerment now at the moment that is very, very nasty. I mean, with all the windmill building and you know the regulation in Tana River Valley and the constant threat that is like a black cloud over the Sami societies. So now I'm going to stop and Outi can continue.
Oh, you never stop. I love to listen to you. Yeah, it was. Yeah, for me, the rematriation is really like a physical thing, and it's about meeting with people, meeting with the ancestor, meeting with the new generations, and that is a big challenge also for the Sami museums, like how they could be this kind of safe, how they can create a safe space for us to meet there in the generational level, and we are lacking of like people working enough there. So it's something that I'm really much looking forward, like when we are getting back some our belongings to the Sami museums, like what will our museums, how they will react and how they will yeah, it's very important that, or they should work for the society.
Yes, and I have been thinking about, sorry, because I think that and I have said to my professor, for example, in Kielagas Institute, which is the Institute for Sami Cultural Studies in Finland, that I think that we need education. We need education for young Sami people to start to work in museum branch, but also we perhaps need people who are specialized also in psychological matters, because we have societies who have lost almost everything, at least some families, mainly speaking now about the Skolt Sami, and thinking about that, I know that you know, the fact that, for example, our museum or national museum shows a picture of some object that you look at, and you look at it and you look, oh, there is my ancestors' object or belonging. It's there, but I have no connection to it. Not I need to have a connection, and I'm kind of, you know, it can be psychologically really really challenging. And I'm thinking about when you had this title, The Many Complexities of Repatriation. I think this is one of the complexities. We celebrate that we are now getting back very soon. In next month, we are getting back 2,200 Sami objects, the whole collection from National Museum. Over 1/3 of it is called Sami heritage. How do we secure that we will not kind of do something that would be hurtful? I mean, it's obviously it's a wonderful thing, but I mean, how to do it in a way that you first have the possibility to get to know your ancestors before they are brought visible to all the society.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's sort of, for me, it brings to mind this notion of museums and how instrumental they were in the, you know, in the project of colonialism. How museums were, you know, at the forefront of the colonial project to help dispossess indigenous people of their land, of their religion, of their knowledge, of their people, and of their, you know, material culture. But it also says something about how the museums, the museums today can either, so they can make a choice, like museum workers and museums can make a choice. They can either continue this brutality of dispossession and continue to refuse um, to help facilitate what we need as a community, what we indigenous communities need as communities to initiate processes of rematriation, and by that also processes of healing. So they can refuse to do that, or museums can actually acknowledge their responsibility, take responsibility for their acts in the past and in the present, and how they help to sort of perpetuate all of those things that continue to perpetuate the trauma indigenous peoples often feel. Because as long as our museums do not have our objects, as long as our ancestors that are now in museum basements far outside of our communities, as long as they are not returned to us, and with that, all of the qualities of the object and the stories and the voices of the object, how do you realistically initiate that process of healing? How do you, as a community, as a people, how do you start the difficult discussions that we have ahead of us? Because as you said, Eeva-Kristiina, we are continuously under threat. Windmill parks, railways, there is no end to the continued brutality upon our lands. And by continuing the brutality upon our lands, they are continuing the brutality upon our bodies and upon our senses and our minds. And I think, museums have a part to play in this process, so they can take a stand and be those that says we no longer wish to be a part of this, and that means working with us to ensure that our needs are met for once. Or it can be just maintaining the status quo and say, well, this is how it is, so we're just going to continue doing this. I don't know, that's just a reflection I have, I think. I don't know, do you want to join in maybe?
Yeah, the problem obviously is that many times museums say that, okay, we legally bought them, and we know there are universal museums like British Museum and Versailles and a bunch of others. There is Humboldt Forum and all these kind of museums that think that they are kind of, representing the whole universal culture and not instead of one tribe or one peoples or nations or whatever. But I think that one solution to this is actually doing this provenance research and showing that, okay, legally in your law, in Western law, it was perhaps done in the right way. But if you read the kind of, the museum diaries, for example, in Nordiska Museet, you can see that there are pages and pages and pages and pages, spoons brought from throughout the Sami land. And you think, okay, I get this picture that people are left without no spoons, and you can actually read about situations that they have been, that there has been a hunt for the objects. But there is also another side. There are researchers who like kind of, and I have to mention this also, they really kind of admire and they have a strong vertevuotta, strong friendship. So everything is nothing is black and white, but I think it is important to acknowledge that this gathering, collecting, was not entirely kind of good or done in a way that we can consider ethical, at least in today through our glasses. So I think this is one point. But I really have noticed that there are very many. I think the world has really changed. There has been a change of paradigm, and we see that Western museums, many of them, want to want to start discussion, want to start thinking about provenance research and repatriation, and obviously they also want to simultaneously take some kind of part to it, and that's fantastic. But it also requires specialists from the Sami side.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge work. And thinking about the European collections, there are collections that contain objects from all the Sami societies. So it's something that all the states, or the Sami parliaments, the Sami museums should work together so that we know where the objects come from, because we have to know where they come from in order to repatriate them. But obviously that's something that a Tuojar can see, but not maybe in some cases you cannot maybe see it. So it's a difficult question, and but I hope that we will move towards where everyone can see the importance of these objects in Sápmi among Sami people.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, and you brought up the Tuojar, and I think that the Tuojar has a really important role in this process, because if we think of, yes, they have the most important role.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
If we think about Tuoji as an epistemology, as a system of knowledge, then the Tuojarat that we have are really the true academics of our people and our communities, and so they need to be involved. And I think we need to stress that a lot more when we have these conversations and when we talk to museums and we say, it's very good that you invite me because I'm an archaeologist or a museologist, so this is my field. But also you should talk to our Tuojarat, because they have the knowledge that is needed to recognize the provenience of these objects. They have the knowledge needed to see what stories potentially still can be read in these objects. And that's just, that to add on. I don't know, Outi, if you want to add on something here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like how author Rauni Makkalukkari had said that what is a message which opens to those who can read it. And but I also think that it's very important to open the archives also to other Sami persons maybe who are living in the traditional livelihoods, and since they have a different kind of knowledge of how to use or wear or how to it's also very important. So we all are involved into this.
Yeah, and maybe that's the point, that we need to work to help museums shift or recenter the way that they think about the objects and about who should have access to them, and just really say that, look, you need to be more democratic. You need to open up, because we all in our communities have a right to our objects. And as you said, Eeva-Kristiina, mostly these objects, they were acquired in a very morally questionable way, at least if we look at it with today's eyes. And I don't care about the law back then. I'm looking at it now as a Sami person and as a scholar and academic. And I really think that, it wouldn't be wrong to say that, look, objects came in a very brutal way sometimes to museums. And this brutality will only continue as long as you refuse access to them. But, ideally, in the end, what we really want is to see a return happen.
And I know this comment will make me unpopular now, but I wish to add that we had in Finnish side of Sápmi, and also in Norwegian side of Sápmi, there was this so-called Lapland War. For those who do not know, we had the German occupation, or you had the German occupation, and we were actually allied with the Germans, so or Finnish state, and then when the war became to an end, and we have to make the peace with the Soviet Union, then the German were kind of driven out of Finland via Finnmark, then to Norway, and this actually destroyed a lot. People were evacuated, and they could only have little amount of stuff with them. Some of it was buried into the earth or ground, but still we have to think that a lot of Finnmark, a lot of Finnish Sápmi was burned. So even though this makes me very unpopular person, I have to say that we are also very happy and happy that there are these museum objects that are in the museums. But I think that there has been a time, already 20 years, that we have had facilities here in Sápmi to look after them. So I mean that the process should have been more open and more like it could have been started a lot earlier, but well, we have to live with what we have now. But having said that, it's good that we have objects that can be brought back home. Obviously, the Swedish Sami do not have this problem. They have a lot of beautiful things that are, because they did not suffer from the war in a way that Finnish and the Norwegian or the Sami living in these countries did.
Yeah, and it's always, this question about, it's good that there are still objects to bring back.
Yes, I know, and this is really, I know that this was a stupid thing to say, but I still wanted, because this is not the real problem that we have, but I think it was still, because I really know that a lot of material culture was destroyed. So but let's hope that we will soon have all these drums and objects repatriated, and like, as a good example, I think, well, Båstede, but also this exhibition that National Museum of Finland and Sida are now going to make, and Outi, please add up to this, but I think we have tried to together make an exhibition that also touches the ugly sides of Finnish history. So it will be also a way of kind of mutually talking about the history without the fact that the Finnish people would try to kind of tell the Sami story.
Yeah, that was very important that you said all this, Eeva-Kristiina, and it's so much, everything is so much interesting when you see that they are not black and white, and that makes them so complicated and interesting. And as you said, it's like so wonderful work all the European museums has done, that they have been taking care of all our belongings. But now we are living the times that it's like an urgent need to get together with the belongings and start the healing and relearning and understanding processes in the Sami society. So
and also, like, it's also something about having the right and opportunity to tell our own history, not only have history being told about us, if you know what I mean. Because museums, of course, have immense power. They have the ability and the power to name and represent, and so they create narratives. They disseminate. They tell the history. And when we, one of the important things in that process is objects. So when you have the objects to tell the stories, then in a way, you own the story. You decide which story is told and also which story is not told. And that's why it's so important that we have ownership and the right to decide for ourselves what happens with our material culture, because it's it's 2021, and I think we can all agree that it's high time that we are now that we now tell our own stories. We have that right. So maybe this is me then just saying that this is a statement. We have a right to tell our own stories. We want to do it, and we think museums should respect and honor that right by working to return our objects. It's just
and maybe if return is at this point impossible, then at least or I think that all the exhibitions where Sami objects or belongings are shown or that tells about the Sami, they should be done in cooperation with the Sami people. And I mean not like we say gummistempel, a rubber stamp.
Yes.
I mean like from the beginning on, like asking, do you want to make this exhibition? What would you like to highlight from our collections? And also thinking about all sorts of reciprocity, kind of, not thinking about, and this goes also to research. Like you cannot come to Sápmi and say, okay, I'm not going to dig your finest places, and then maybe you will get to read my report. And I will take all the stuff to Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, whatever. But you have to kind of, I would say you have to be humble from the Western side. I mean, if you want to do the work, you have to be humble. You have to accept that you are not the boss now. Like
I very much agree. Yes. I think that is something that, it's really, but it's when you say it like that, it seems so self-evident. It's so, it's, of course, yes, you're not the boss anymore, but it's, it's still, it needs to be said and articulated, because in these meetings, it really needs to be said that, look, we're not okay with the situation as it is now. We really want to have these discussions, and we understand, hence the title of this talk, the complexities of repatriation. We understand that these are, complex issues that we are dealing with, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't deal with it. And in that sense, I really think, we need to center, we need to shift our perspective, or Western museums need to shift their perspective, and the perspective they need to respect and sort of honor is the perspective that comes from source communities. I think this is really important. And that's also why, I'm so, I loved reading the book when it came. And I've loved every time I've heard you talk, I've really enjoyed it. And every time we've had conversations in different places, this is something that always, is one of the things that I take away from our conversation, is this very positive feeling of hope that, this work is possible, and we've seen it already. And museums can no longer say, no, it's too difficult, we can't do this, we don't have the means or the possibilities. No, that's not true. Look, we've seen it happen already. We have example of this working. And now we also have this beautiful book with beautiful images to show and say, look, you can do it. Now, Eeva-Kristiina, you should hold up the book so everyone can see. Look, we have the documentation that it is possible. So yeah, it is, it's visually, your book is absolutely stunning. And every time I go through it, I'm reminded of this talk that Harald Gaski gave when he talked about the importance of Sami publications and how we need to understand that it's not only the words, but we have this idea of lohkat kovvaid. So we're reading images as well. And I think your book, yes, spot on. So,
I could add about for this there were so many good things, but I could continue about this. How should the ethnographical museums, how can they build their exhibitions there? Since I feel like I'm really angry and really don't like it, the idea that our ancestors' visual tradition is shown in the ethnographical museum the way that they have been exhibited in many decades. And then as the Western society's visual tradition is exhibited in the art museums, and there is a huge gap between the valuations that we see those items there. So that is something that I really wish the ethnographical museums should work within, like how to present the belongings and And there is of course a big need for curating from the Sami perspective.
Absolutely.
So I'm really much looking forward to like we should have more Sami curators.
Yes, yes. And it's the thing is, we have Sami curators. It's just about them not being employed by the institutions that put up exhibitions of art. So really, we should just, I don't know who is watching right now, but I would, I would really urge art institutions to actually go out and employ Sami curators. We have them.
We have
they're
wonderful
already
persons. Yes, that's so true.
And it's such a good and valid point. I mean, yes, absolutely. The fact is that, we really need to shift the locations that show off the visual and aesthetic expressions of our peoples. We need to remove it from the ethnographic museum, and we need to really go in and grab that space in these galleries and in these places and say, look, this is what it is, and we want to show it here. So
yeah, I think that as an example, by the way, talking about our book, I'm not going to change the subject. I just want to say this book is in Northern Sami and in English, but one good example of the Sami way of seeing things, we have here, for example, ethnographical pictures, which are sometimes quite, actually, you of course, they are wonderful because you can observe many things about it, but they sometimes look so kind of like your heart breaks when you look at them. And you can see the emptiness, and they are in archives, and these people, their souls have been kind of and then what we did with Outi was that we put them together with their ancestral colors and materials. We wanted to kind of rematriate them into the colorful world where they become from, so that I think they have been partly taken home in this sense.
Yeah. Yeah, they've been indigenized in a sense.
Yes, Samified.
Yeah, Samified, precisely. So I see that we still have time, but I know that there are some questions from the audience. So maybe that's something maybe we can open up for the questions. I think Celia has she knows the question, so she'll take it from here.
Thank you so much. Also from the audience, we have had some questions, but also things like, this is wonderful. Thank you for a very insightful discussion and talk. So I just wanted to say thank you to you three. You're right, there have been some questions underway, and I think I'll start with one that might open up a whole new discussion, but let's see where it takes us. Actually, all three of you have spoken a lot about dodgy, and the materials and what the material means to you. So the question is, when you talk about material culture, isn't there also something important about immaterial culture? And I'm sorry if I'm opening up a whole new discussion now. I'll leave it to the three of you to answer this question from one of our audience.
Okay, if you don't mind, I would like to start on this because I have some very strong feelings about material and immaterial culture, because I feel that material culture is in itself immaterial. I don't like that distinction. I feel it's I feel that I feel it's a very colonial Western thing to say that you have material culture and then you have the immaterial qualities, because that what you're doing then is you're separating important aspect, meaning, values, and stories from an object. What you're doing is essentially killing it. So you're basically removing the value in the source, like what the source community feel is valuable is removed. And I don't know if that's done because it then makes it easier to take an object into a museum collection. Like it's something about, you know, this is an object, it's very neutral, it's fine, we can collect it, we can do whatever we want with it. So what happens then when you use these terms, material versus immaterial, is that you're, in essence, you're basically alienating the source community. And by doing so, you're claiming right of ownership over something that was never yours in the first place. Yeah, that's, at least that's my feelings on the subject. So
I totally agree, and this is really by this distinction you amputate the things we are talking about, the belongings, and I'm totally aware of this. But sometimes, you know, when you keep a presentation, you are a bit nervous. and don't remember all the finesses. But I totally agree. Thank you, Liisa Rauna, for giving such a good definition about the fact.
Okay, Outi, do you want to say something on this subject, or should we?
Well, I think Liisa Rauna was very good in that, but it's like in general, like what the patriarchalism has brought, the like how it has brought the hierarchies into some societies, and it's like in so many different levels also in here. But it's like in the when we are talking about the gender issues or the what is the human versus nature or the sacred and profane in Sami culture, all are like mixed. They are not either or, but they are like both.
Yes.
In many ways.
Could I then follow up? What about music, songs, or voices? Do those things fall into the same definition, or do you see that differently?
I'm not really sure I understand the question. So are you?
If that is immaterial, or do you see that also as a combination of material and immaterial? Or do you not refer to it as an immaterial part of your culture?
I think the point really is that there should not be a distinction. Right now we're talking in English, and you know, English has this developed terms, and so material culture is what's used in museum, etc., etc. It's the same with nature culture. So the divide between nature culture, which I also feel is a really colonial idea, because it shouldn't be separated. And I think this goes also to, you know, whichever Sami expression you want to talk about, that why do we need to distinguish? Isn't the whole of it the whole point? You know?
Yeah, the problem is that, and this comes also from the Western world, that we have archives, and we have, you know, memory institutions are archives, music archives, sound archives, paper archives, photo archives. Then we have museums, and we have institutions, and somehow, even though it is a kind of violent breaking, it disassociates these items and this whole kind of worldview into boxes. And often when we get finance, for example, for a project to make a survey, we get it to, for example, to survey the archives or to survey the museums. And that is how it's it's a tool we use because basically museum and research world, sorry for saying this, but it is a Western concept. So we should really concentrate when we speak and have discussions about this fact. So I would say, no, it's not different, but under these circumstances, the world that we're working makes us to make.
We have a question from OCA director Katia Garcia Anton. And she claims that museums, whichever way you look at them, are based on a colonial heritage and structure. To what extent might Sami museums be challenged by this heritage? And with this heritage, how can they work to secure a Sami empowered space for rematriation?
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we need to keep in mind now is, it's not as if Sami museums are funded by Sami people alone. So it's not as if we are, taking a pay cut and, a percentage of our salaries or whatnot goes into the establishment of a museum. There is a very strict, there are very strict criteria for what a museum is. And those criteria is what determines who gets funding or not. So what happens is, of course, that these very colonial structures are enforced upon Sami communities because they want to establish museums. They want to create spaces that acknowledge and take care of our cultural expressions. And then you come to the funding situation. And to get funding, you need to conform to these criteria. So, it's not easy for Sami museums today to break out of this mold. And I think if we are, they do what they can. They sort of twist the boundaries and the lines and they manipulate and they really do amazing work with what they've been granted, which is, it's a very Sami thing. You take what you have and you work with it. But I really think that what we need to do is initiate a discussion. And now we're talking about, museology as a practice is one thing, but we really should talk about indigenous museology. What does that mean? And I think in that sense, what we need to be aware of is the power of words, right? So, we talk about collections. We could just as easily have been talking about loot. This is loot. This is stolen goods. We talk about repatriation when, in essence, repatriation is basically returning stolen property in many, contexts. But the system is built on one perspective. That perspective is Western and it comes from Western colonial context. So, and it's like Eeva-Kristiina said here earlier about when we use these terms, like for instance, material, immaterial, we're forced to work within the system to try and do the best that we can do. Sometimes that works, other times it doesn't work, but topics or discussions such as this is one place where we take the space, where we basically just grab the space that we need to have these discussions and talk about these important topics. But I really think that, in general, we should all be more reflexive. We should really reflect on what words do we use, whose perspective do we center, and by doing so, which structure are we helping reinforce or helping build? Do we want to build Sami museum structures? Absolutely. But to do so, we need to be in a space where we are able to do so. And to get to that point, well, we haven't gotten there yet. I hope that sometime in the future we can get there. And I think discussions such as this is one way to really increase awareness about these topics, because it is very important topics that we are talking about here. So yeah, I don't know if that really answered. I don't know, maybe Outi or Eeva-Kristiina want to add on to what I said?
I think that, like I think Outi or I previously said, the Sami museum world is in change at the moment, and I see it really like that in this era of repatriation, there will be a shift towards a platform that is a social environment for the Sami people to come and connect with the belongings and have these discussions. And this will change the social role of the Sami Museum even more towards for being there for the people. And I have to say it is a big challenge. They're doing good work at the moment, but the work must be kind of shifted towards something that is really meaningful to the people. So good luck. I know there are many researchers that will follow how it will go. So, but maybe Outi wants to say something as well, because we have been discussing about this a lot.
Yeah, well, firstly, like our Latjokahpir project is one example of the rematriation work, and it's like mostly based in collaboration between the society or as many people as possible. So I think like the museum just need to be open and ask from the society what they want and what they need and how they want to be in a relation with the belongings. And of course, this is something that we have been slightly been working with the Sami Museum Siitä new exhibition. And it has been so sad because we have been living with the COVID situation. So all of these wonderful ideas of getting together and asking from the villages to village or from many kind of societies what they would, how they would, what kind of exhibition they would like to see and how things should be presented. So it has been, of course, really challenging. But at the other hand, we can say that, okay, this is only a starting point and it is a long, long way to walk. Yeah, but it can be like really fun and nice and like wonderful.
Actually,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
We actually also have audience from the US with us, and it's in connection with this that I'm asking one question from there. Here in the US, we have the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. I was wondering if there is any possible legislation like that in the works for any of the European countries or in Sápmi.
No.
So there we have something to work on. Shifting to something related, but perhaps a little bit more wider. Which role do you think Germany or European institutions can play when it comes to ensuring more visibility for Sami artists? And are there a lot of Sami objects kept in museums beyond the Nordic states? And how do you go about trying to repatriating or rematriating them? Big questions, I'm sorry.
Well, if I will answer first, then I only answer for the amount of objects. There are approximately about 5,000 objects outside Scandinavia and Russia. And the largest collection actually in Europe is the collection of Museum of European Cultures in Berlin, with almost 900 or 980 objects. I'm not quite sure now, but that's kind of the amount, and in addition several hundred photographs, but they are very, very interested in cooperating with the Sami people. And there is a project that is beginning, so I'm looking forward to it. And also in Munich there is a big collection in the Museum of Four Continents, over 500 objects. But there are big collections all over Europe. And now you can answer to the other part of the.
Well, yeah, there are many collections in Europe. I think, you know, one of the difficulties sometimes is knowing about which collections exist and where do they exist. I also think that museums, you know, often I feel as if museums very much think that the people are there for them, you know, that people are a byproduct of museums, but actually museums are there for the people. And so when it comes to the question about visibility, I think a lot of these institutions, what they can do is create project that works with Sami communities. And these can, of course, be projects that look into the provenance of objects. You know, I once visited a European museum and was invited to take a look at their collection. Not only that the collection exhibited, but also the collection behind the scenes. And one of the acquisition texts that followed an object was quite brutal because it detailed how the collector in the mid-19th century had wanted to buy a getka, so an old cradle, and the mother who kept her newborn child in it didn't want to sell it. So what the collector did was that he waited until the mother put the child down with the getka, and then he stole it, ran off with it, and took it back to his European country, and it's now in a museum. Now, because this is part of the acquisition text, this is knowledge that the museum should be aware of. And then they should also take the responsibility to actually repair that damage, because this is an obvious case of theft. Instead, museums keep these stories hidden.
Where did this happen?
It happened on the Swedish side. A reindeer herding family in the, you know, in the Karesuando area.
Okay. Yeah.
We can talk about which museum privately. You know, we can talk about this, but I remember reading that and I was so shocked that, you know, you have this object and you have these stories and you know basically which area. What are you doing still with it in your collection? You should, you know, you should really start a repatriation process. And I think this, you know, one of the things that institutions can do when it comes to visibility is make these stories known. Don't hide them away. If you put on an exhibition with Sami artifacts, then tell the stories about how they came to the museum, how they were either stolen or bought in a colonial context. Be very transparent about the context that we are working in. I think that is, you know, that is one step. And then eventually, I would like to see that every institution that has Sami collections also have Sami people working.
I think I have a question here that is a bit related to what you just said, Outi, and it refers to doji. And I'm sorry if I pronounced it not correctly, but often doji is being translated with the traditional Sami crafts. Yet we have learned now, of course, that it is so much more, and that the translation doesn't really pay justice to it. So in the art world, at least in the West, crafts, they are very often put into kind of the hobby department. What would contribute to solving this dilemma for material-based works of contemporary artists?
That's not an easy question to answer. I think, and now I'm speaking strictly for a Sami context, what I would really like to see is that doji is always used and it is never translated into this is Sami handicraft. Instead, you should rather, you know, talk about what doji is and how it is an aesthetic practice, how it is a system of knowledge, and how it involves so many elements. I think I don't feel that I can really talk about craft and how to better the situation for craft, like craft in general. But I think that when it comes to Deutsche, this is one way to do it. And also, I really think that, language is an interesting thing. Language are shaped by the people that speak it. Language is shaped by context and the lands we come from and the areas we live in. So when you have a concept, a phenomena within a culture that also have an attached name to it, why would you translate it? Why can't you just use that name and then instead give a description, talk about what it is, instead of we need to have, see, this is the power dynamics, right? So in a Western context, there is a need to always categorize, to box things into something. And, when you say that Doji is craft, that's what you're doing. You're categorizing it and you're boxing it to make it make sense in a Western context and a Western perspective. Why do we need to do, why? Why? Isn't it enough that Deutsche is Deutsche and then we can talk about what Deutsche is? We don't need to translate it. It's the same with most Sami terms and concepts that we use. Arbetjätte, for instance, which basically means that this is knowledge that is inherited. Why do we need to translate it to mean traditional knowledge? Because this is a word that already exists in the Western context. And, in a Western context, you need these labels. You need to label things. And because you can't really label the Sami thing or phenomena or concept, you take that concept and you rename it in another language. And by doing so, you're in essence alienating that term from its original language and source communities. So yeah, Deutsche is Deutsche. I don't know what more to say.
Yeah. It's like we in research, I use always the original terms and then define them and then continue using the original terms. Yes. And I think that's one way of doing it. So yeah, because it does not. It's difficult to define it in, like you said, in English, Finnish, Swedish, whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I urge all the researchers and all the people working in museums to use the correct terms.
Yes. Seconded.
Okay, I have a question that is not related to this, but it's a kind of a introvert reflecting question. How much do you think we have been affected by seeing our everyday things and cultures in museums? And do you think that we can somewhat reverse it by wearing our own clothes?
When I did my doctoral thesis, I was very much, struggling with how to present my work. And in the end, I ended up incorporating myself in that story that I was telling. And there is this one childhood memory that I have of visiting a museum at a very young age with my class. And looking at a Sami collection. And I've been looking so forward to doing this because I was Sami, and for once I would be the most knowledgeable person in the room. And then I came to the exhibition and I was struck by how it didn't represent me at all. I didn't feel at home in that exhibition. I felt alienated. I felt as if I was a foreigner in my own home. I didn't, of course, have the words to articulate it back then as I did now, but I remember very clearly this very sense of, I don't know how to put it, but there was this very bad feeling as a child. And I realized today that what had happened was that I didn't feel secure in myself anymore. Someone had taken away my security in myself as a person, and that someone was an institution. It was a museum that had exhibited my culture. I think that by wearing the gahti, what for me, what I am doing when I'm wearing the gakti in an everyday setting is that I am normalizing what it means to be Sami. And what it means for me to be Sami is not defined by any museum. That is defined by me. It is defined by the community that I live in. And I really think that this is a really important aspect of, or this is a really important process of empowerment, because it's difficult to put into words, I think, but it's something about putting on the gakti allows me to tell my story. And by doing so, I take away the museum's power to tell my story, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's just a reflection. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's my experience, and I wrote about this in my work. And I think it's important to be open about this, about the difficulties that we face, and how we work to overcome that difficulties. For me, that is normalizing the relationship that I have to my culture, and I do so by not allowing anyone to tell me what it is, but instead just becoming with the story, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Outi, could you also answer? I would like to hear what you say about this.
I'm not sure if I understood it about wearing cactus. Well, for me, it's like an ongoing process, which is very like a conversation in the society, and I'm really much interesting to have that kind of conversation and seeing like what it tells about us, and in what kind of situation we are living at the moment, and what it reflects all the topics or the interesting things that are in the air at the moment. And you can in a half a year or year, you can see it from the cactus, what has been the topics, what people have been talking. And that's, I feel it's so wonderful. And really much looking forward, like we have been living quite a long time, that the cacti has started to be so like as a festival costume, or like really beautiful, really like decorated, really much everything. And it's a masterpiece of Tuotti. And it's, of course, it's telling a lot of about us and how, and giving empowerment when we are gathering together with cactus. But on the other hand, it's also kind of a bit sad way where we have been going, and now I see that maybe it's turning kind of more practical, into more practical questions, like what you need to think when you really want to wear a cacti as in everyday life. And that is really interesting. And of course the new discussions about the connected to the gender issues. And so I think that the cacti trend nowadays, it's very colonized, and we need to decolonize it in many ways. And it's so joyful process also. It's hard, but it's also joyful, or it can be, or sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Eeva-Kristiina, would you like to add something? No. We will now, in this almost last question, return to, I think, what was really the entry point of your talk. It is a question from someone in the US, starting with, "This is wonderful, thank you." And I can only agree to that. The question reads, "I grew up in a Laestadian community here in the USA, and women are still required to cover our heads in church. Did you find any reference to the Ladjukapper in the writings of Laestadius?" I'm sorry for my mispronunciation. And then Intriguing to see the metamorphosis of the hat shape from tall to small as reflecting the role of women under colonialism. Practically, could the hat have been used for storing valuables?
Well, according, well, it is actually probably so that the hat, the model of the hat changed because of the Laestadian religion or the movement, and actually there are two kinds of narratives, or the other one is actually the priest Zeitlitz, who was a priest in the area of Kautokeino and Karasjok, in the area where this hat was also used, writes about the people, the women who were members of the movement, that in Christmas, probable that it was the movement and then other women followed her. And then also there is a narrative from Kautokeino that tells that the women themselves threw the fierras, the wooden structures, into the small pond that is near the Kautokeino church. So probably this is more the reason, because we have, for example, priests, Lutheran priests who write that, who describe the Sami women coming, for example, to Utsjoki church and how they look very nice in their latjokahpirs. And so it seems to be that it was not the Lutheran priest, it was this movement. And because it was in this movement, of course, the Christian view of a woman as a virtuous and as a mother, it became even more restrictive, because you had to be, you could not decorate yourself because it's sinful, and you don't know sorrow. Like, I do not know the words in English, but probably you who are Laestadian or grew up in that area, you know what I mean. So this was more suitable because the hat was too decorative. So probably there are very many reasons and processes that go simultaneously with it. But yes, this was something, instead using the jollekahpir, the very tight hat, or using the scarf. And otherwise also in the Sami area, people, it was visible in their in the Sami dress in many areas, and moves from, or spreads from the Kautokeino area to finally to the Varanger area. So
just also one part of the question about if riches were kept in the Ladjokapia. There is actually an acquisition text from a Norwegian museum that talks about that being the case. I don't know if that is something to believe in, but the Norwegians seem to think so. Yeah.
Well, we have seen almost all of the hats, and I know that there is this one source.
Yeah.
But we have not seen anything like that would suggest or read anything in other places that would suggest to this direction. And actually, I do not know, Outi can comment to this, but would it be a little bit unpractical to have something there?
Yeah, I feel it's very unpractical, but perhaps it's good to have your hair inside the fierra, the horn. That can be possible, and yeah, and it has been said in some places that in the everyday life you might took away the wooden part, the fierra, from the hat. And yeah, it has been so, but there is so many interesting details in the Latjokahpir research, and we have find very interesting things that should be studied much more. For example, like some sewings in the few hats that we have sewn, that they have kind of other meanings, not only for sewing, but there is something maybe ritual meanings in that. There is in some hats a part which are partly sewed by thread that is made out of bear underwool, human hair, and sinner thread. And so when you just get together with the ancestor belongings and really can't study them, we can make like really interesting and important findings from there.
Thank you very much. I actually feel that this whole talk has been an answer to the very last question, and that is, which particular knowledge do Sami have that is crucial for contemporary debates and we all can and must learn from? And that would be the last question, and I think actually that has been answered through this fabulous talk. But Lisa Ravna, would you like to say a few last words?
No, I think it's a good way of putting it, that the talk so far has answered that question. I think we have very in different way demonstrated now what we can take from Sami context and enter into these important discussions that are happening all over the world. So yeah, I also think it's like a small comment on the Lajukappe and whether or not riches were kept in the horn. Like riches, of course, in this acquisition text was meant as money or gold and jewels and whatnot. And I think it's interesting to look at the difference between what is a written source from an outsider perspective, whereas what the object itself tells us from a Sami point of view. And then for me, what I hear Outi and Eeva-Kristiina say now has, for me, means that, okay, then riches were not kept in the hat in that sense. And I think, this could be a good way to just close the conversation, just to really impress upon everyone that is listening now that we have these knowledges, we have our literature, and our literature